What's the most unprofessional thing a doctor has said to you? It wasn't so much something he said as something he did. I came in for a suspected broken leg and he had a couple of residents with him. After the x-ray and having already found out my leg was indeed broken, he grabs my leg and looks to the residents and says, "An old but reliable method for diagnosing a broken leg is to place a hand on the ankle, a hand on the knee, and place your knee in the center, then pretend like you're trying to break a stick. If they yell, their leg is broken." He actually fricking did it to me 3 times to teach these residents. I haven't been back to him since. Bro, I would have punched him if he'd tried that crap. I'm not a violent person, but he's literally talking about pushing a broken bone with his knee. That's bullcrap. Dude, that's only part of it. The whole reason I had to go to him, family doctor, is because the hospitals screwed my stuff up. The day I broke it, I went to the hospital and had it x-rayed. They said I'd just bruised the bone but didn't break it. They sent me home with some meds and that was that. Well, 1 month later, it was still hurting just as bad. So I went to the doctor from my original comment. Like I said, he diagnosed my broken leg. I'd been walking around on said broke leg without a cast for 1 month. It even grew back crooked. I even paid the hospital $500 for their x-ray. I guess the moral of the story is that if you're a 240-pound man, don't play on rope swings. Well, F me sideways. I got an x-ray of my back and hips. The doctor's first time seeing them was with me in the room. These words, folks, is how I found out that my back was broke. To explain, one of my legs is shorter than the other, so my hips don't align. Anything involving moving my hips since I was a kid has basically made the base of my spine grind against itself. By the time we figured this out, my L4 and L5 disc had nearly degenerated to nothing, and my sciatic nerve was basically sitting there waving at everyone without any protection in that area. Yeah, I had something very similar when I broke bones in my elbow. The radiologist asked if I could straighten it out. I told him I couldn't, so he snapped a couple of x-rays. With a look of horror, he exclaimed, "Holy frick! No wonder you can't move it. Just keep it still till we can get the orthopedic surgeon on call." I had a leading allergy specialist say to me, "Well, I'll be effed if I know," after a lengthy investigation over several weeks into my post-nasal drip issues. He'd tried everything and was all out of ideas. I didn't mind at all, in fact, I rather appreciated his honesty. It's probably quite telling that a lot of these in a row are just doctors using the F word to underline the fact that they haven't been able to diagnose. And yeah, I'm fine with the language to state the irritating nature of the problem. Another commenter agrees. Similar thing happened with my father-in-law. Men in that family have huge heads and thick necks. Not fat, just structurally over-engineered. He was having neck pain and went in to get a surgery consult after seeing other doctors. The doctor comes in for the consult, takes one look and says, "If my head was that big, my neck would hurt too." My father-in-law fell over laughing and they had a great working relationship from there on out working through the recovery. The doctor was doing a pap smear and he said, "Whoa," at one point while the speculum was in. I never did find out why, but I'm assuming he was just amazed by my awesome lady parts. "I need you to be fully firm," referring to my wang. I was referred to a urologist for Peyronie's disease. I believe my Johnson had been developing a bend in it. As part of his assessment, the urologist gave me an injection in the named part and some adult magazines. He left me alone in the room so I could become excited. Then he returned and used a toy to make me fully firm. However, when I told him I was on the verge of arriving, he just kept going and I splooched. Then he took some measurements with plastic rulers. He said that he needed to do this to take reference measurements to see if my condition is worsening. I have no idea what measurements he took because I was frankly overwhelmed by the experience. For him to look at my stiff eggplant didn't seem completely implausible. After all, I couldn't see a problem unless I was at full mast. Getting me fully firm, well, that was stretching my credibility. And when he kept going until I arrived, that just didn't make any sense. I asked about this on an online urology forum and found that this is so far outside of ethical practice that nobody would take me seriously. They assumed that I was just trying to share some fantasy I'd created. Nobody believed that a urologist would act this way. I'm not gay, and if I was trying to create a fantasy, I could probably do much better than him. I'm so sorry he did that to you. There is no excuse for doing that. He betrayed your trust and disregarded your dignity and wishes. I don't know what the legal boundary is, but this feels like he could be fired for that. You didn't consent to that, and there was no appropriate reason for him to have done that. Please report him. Don't worry about whether they believe you or not, which is out of your control. If anyone else reports him, your reports will back each other's up. I just wanted to add, and you probably know this, that this was completely his fault. You trusted him to behave professionally. He shouldn't have used the toy on you. He should have left it with you, stood outside the door, and said to let him know when you were ready for him to examine you. I'm so sorry you experienced this. Went to a psychiatrist because I wanted to self-delete. He said, "Well, you don't seem sad, I can't really help." You know how to spread 'em. I was at the gyno's office and needed to open my legs a little more in the stirrups during the examination. Wow, that's inappropriate. My mom's first gyno appointment with an elderly male doctor, she didn't really want to open her legs to him. He said, "You really think you've got something down there that I haven't seen before?" He turned out to be a really good doctor, and my mom uses the story to remind me to not be embarrassed of crap that everyone has. Not said, but done. I was at the pediatrician having a physical. A youngish, probably late 20s to early 30s, attractive to my brain, blonde woman doctor gives me a physical. It comes time to turn my head and cough. I have become excited in anticipation. She does the whole check for hernia thing, then just before telling me I can pull my pants up, she flicks the head of my wang down with her finger, springing it like a dive board. She smiles slightly and continues on with the rest of the physical like nothing else happened. I don't know if she was trying to make my 12-year-old mind feel at ease about the embarrassing, to me anyway, situation, but I've never forgotten about that moment. During my first physical at about the same age, my female doctor counted my testes, saying, "1 thingy-dingy, 2 thingy-dingies," probably trying to put me at ease, but it was so weird and out of place. Look, I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to call you on my phone later on this evening and we'll discuss options off the book. It's my personal number, so I would appreciate it if you kept it to yourself. Highly unprofessional, but hugely helpful. Best doctor I've met, for sure. Is that unprofessional? I had a doctor who knew I suffered from terrible allergies and sinus inflammations every spring, and I was getting married. She scrounged around for pharmaceutical samples of anti-allergy and sinus medication for me, and of course didn't charge me for them, and gave me her personal number telling me to call her over the weekend if my symptoms worsened, and she'd see what else she could come up with. Turns out I didn't need it. The stuff she gave me worked great, but I appreciated the gesture. Didn't occur to me that this was unprofessional. I thought it was just going above and beyond as a doctor. I would say get a vibe check if you do get an offer like that from a doctor at the very least. That kind of situation could easily be taken in a very different and much worse direction. I'm glad it worked for both of these people. I had a positive pregnancy test and went to my OB to get a blood test confirmation. Standard practice is to repeat the blood test after 48 hours to see if your HCG levels have doubled, which indicates the pregnancy is progressing normally. About 10 minutes before my second blood draw, I received a call from my OB's office. Since I was already in the hospital parking garage at the time, I decided to just go into the office to see what the call was about. In the waiting room, full of patients, a nurse decided to tell me that I was going to lose the baby, and they called me because they wanted to save me the trouble of getting my blood drawn. I made her draw my blood anyway, knowing that there was no way they could diagnose that with only half the information. Then proceeded to walk out of the office in tears in front of everyone who had just heard what she'd told me. Sure enough, my numbers had doubled. They unfortunately continued to fluctuate after that, which indicated that I was not having a miscarriage, but an ectopic pregnancy. Undiagnosed, an ectopic pregnancy can lead to serious complications, including rupture of the fallopian tube, internal bleeding, and potential death. I continued to go to that OB because my doctor was amazing, but that nurse is on my crap list forever. That nurse deserves to be fired. If everyone heard her tell you about the miscarriage, that's a massive privacy violation, in addition to her being horribly callous and an idiot. Did you tell your doctor about it? Because I'd assume most good doctors wouldn't want someone like that on their staff. I did tell my doctor about it in regards to the confusion it created, but in all the stress and turmoil of getting a proper diagnosis and treatment, following up on what happened to her was the last thing on my mind. My doctor was incredibly sympathetic. I haven't seen that nurse around the office since then. This happened back in January, and at about 18 weeks into a viable pregnancy at this point, I've received really wonderful care from the staff that I've interacted with this time around. If I do happen to see her roaming the hallways, I might just chew her out and blame it on the hormones. When the doctor told my dad that he had cancer in various spots, including his bladder, colon, lymph nodes, and prostate, my mum started crying, obviously. The doctor sneered at my mum and told her to get a grip. Fricking butthole. My dad's okay, by the way. "Well, you're sitting here talking and smiling, you can't be that depressed," said by my psychiatrist a few years ago. "Yeah, frick that. It's not hard to learn to slap on a happy face in public so people stop asking questions. I did it for years." Right? That was probably the third thing he said to me. He hasn't even asked me a question other than, "Why are you here today?" I've had the worst luck with shrinks, too. Repeatedly asked if I could be pregnant when I was like, "I have messed up periods, yo. I'm a lesbian and in a committed relationship with another woman. There's no chance in heck I could be with child, stop asking." My endocrinologist, I have hypothyroidism, is trying to figure out the messed up periods, but I've had them for ages. I badly burned my hand in the college cafeteria and went to the campus health office. I showed skin literally dripping off my hand, begging for a cream or bandage or anything to ease the pain. After making sure I wasn't allergic to anything, they asked if I was doing the deed regularly. I wasn't, but didn't see how that was relevant to my burned hand. She then moved on to my current medications. I was on an asthma inhaler, ADD meds, and birth control. She looked up at me with a smug grin and said, "Alright, well if you aren't doing the deed with anyone, why are you on birth control?" as if she had caught me. I yelled back in her face while clutching my blistered hand, "In case the mood strikes me. Now, if that part of my life is out of the way, can you fix my hand?" Women are on birth control for a lot of reasons. My ex was a virgin and took it because it relieved her cripplingly painful periods. Some women get irregular periods. That nurse is a C word. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My doctor is also my best friend, and I routinely have to get surgery because of a medical problem. Once when he was cutting into somewhere that I couldn't see, he said, "Oops." I was dating a girl for a while, and we both went to the doctor to get tested for transmitted diseases. When she was done, the doctor grabs me and brings me into the room. We chatted for a bit, and he says, "You know, I probably wouldn't date that girl if I were you. When I was in the army, I was dating a girl. One day she calls me and tells me she had chlamydia. My tests came back negative. I was on the phone with the Navy doctor and he said, 'You know what this means, right?' Yeah? Your girlfriend that you were in a monogamous relationship with had a disease and you didn't. Yeah, I get that. Let me rephrase. She got it from somewhere that wasn't you. I got it. I'll deal with it. I mean, that's inappropriate, but looking out. Folks out there fall for the old, 'I caught it from a public toilet or a bus seat' all the time." I mean, I don't know how I feel about that. In my mind, it might not transgress boundaries by saying, "Your partner has evidently got this from someone that wasn't you," but telling them to break up is outside their jurisdiction. "It's not cancer, you don't need to get this checked out." I got it checked out. It was cancer. A psychiatrist told me that he didn't have time for my craziness. After lying to me for weeks, telling me that I was on the waiting list for therapy when I wasn't, I found out when I went to the psychology department that I'd been discharged without a letter to me or my GP. Next time I saw my psychiatrist, he asked me how it made me feel. I told him that it felt like no one cared and just wanted to do me off and tell me what I wanted to hear rather than check to see if what they were saying was even true. The psychiatrist said to me, "That's just your depression making you feel that way." No, you butthole, it's 7 weeks of you telling me I'm on a list and saying you've been checking it yourself when clearly you hadn't. Anyone would feel fobbed off. I was booked to discuss possible knee surgery with a specialist. After several years of physio and many MRIs showed an old injury is not improving. So after a long wait where literally 30 or more people who entered the waiting room after me get seen before I do, I got in the room and the first thing he tells me is that he saw I was next and then deliberately delayed my appointment by 4 hours because other patients were easier to sort out. That's what he actually said. So I was already teed off. He genuinely thought I should be okay with an extra 4-hour wait and no apology at all. Then he can't remember which knee is the issue. I told him and he glanced at the scan and said, "Well, I understand women sometimes feel much more pain than men, but this is probably healed now anyway." Healed. Despite causing issues for 7 years, it's now probably healed. He asks if the pain impacts my life. I listed all the hobbies I've given up, the trips that have been ruined, the flat shoes I had to wear as a bridesmaid because I couldn't walk in heels without crying, and he nods along. So I ask him if I need to take my shoes off for the exam, and he says that's not necessary. He had seen my notes and doesn't think my knee has any problems because if it did, I'd need a wheelchair. Excuse me? I was in that room less than 3 minutes. He didn't look at my leg. He told me if it still hurt to go up and down stairs and collapsed when I tried to do squats in a year, he'd have another look. I rang my doctor immediately. I was furious. She looked over my notes. He wrote that the patient is fully healed and the injury does not affect her in any way. He actually wrote that on my medical records next to a week-old MRI showing 3 massive tears in my tendons and abrasions on the bone. Yeah, magically healed. My doctor wanted me to go back. I've told her I will never speak to that man again and we're figuring out what to do now. One of the doctors in military recruitment post, military service in Russia is mandatory by the way, that's important, looked at me and said something like, "Okay, you're fine," and writes down in my file that I'm healthy. I'm like, "Excuse me, ma'am? I recall having pretty visible scoliosis for my entire freaking life. You might want to consider checking my previous check record from 2 years ago in the same fricking file you're holding. To which he replies, "Oh? Well, it seems to be gone now. This is usual when teenagers grow up. Russian recruitment posts are truly miraculous places. Hundreds of thousands of diseases were cured there in just 1 or 2 health checks. Don't worry, eventually it will curve enough that it will go straight again." I just turned 15 and was getting a throat swab. The male doctor noticed that I'd lost my gag reflex and told me not to worry because it would come in handy for certain adult activities. I looked confused, so he repeated himself with more of an emphasis on adult. "No, I wasn't confused about what you were implying, you idiot. I was confused about what made you think it was a good idea to say it." I'd known the doctor for years and he'd never said or done anything creepy before or since, so I let it slide. Saw a doctor to discuss a bout of depression I was going through a few years ago, and his diagnostic was, "Well, obviously it's got a lot to do with your face." Yeah, I've got some bad acne scarring, but what a crappy thing to say. Yep, that's one heck of an opening statement. I'm not sure anyone likes to begin a conversation being told they're ugly. Is there any other way to interpret it, or am I missing something? When I was a young teenager, I had a lot of problems with ovarian cysts and had several surgeries to remove them. I woke one night with severe pain and was taken to the ER, where an unfamiliar doctor performed an ultrasound to see what was going on. He was gruff and cold towards me. I was understandably nervous and afraid and feeling vulnerable when he jabbed down on my abdomen with the ultrasound device and remarked loudly, "And here we see the scars from getting your child removed at the clinic," in a very judgmental tone. I'd never had that procedure, and I was just in shock and sort of laid there, silently crying, too afraid to say anything. I wish I could have had the guts to say something at the time. To think that this man was dealing with vulnerable, scared young women, the mistakes he must have made and the things he must have said to other girls, just sort of breaks my heart. What kind of doctor thinks that procedure leaves scars on the lower abdomen? I wish you could have kicked him in the throat, partially for being a jerk and partially for being incompetent. I'm not sure. I was a frightened kid in a lot of pain, and it was more his condemning tone that rattled me. This was more than 20 years ago, and I still think about all the things I should have said. When telling him one of my symptoms was that I couldn't do number 2, he said, "Oh, people all over the world get constipated." I had a bowel obstruction. My friend has always been paranoid about getting diabetes since both of her parents have it. She's rail thin, never had an overweight day in her life, and does long-distance running, karate, and yoga. One night, she realized she was seeing halos around any light she looked at. She asked her doctor to check for diabetes, and he laughed and said she was too thin to get diabetes. She said it ran in her family, and he said that it didn't matter, she wasn't fat, so she didn't have it. Her symptoms didn't go away, so she finally went to the hospital and demanded a blood test. She had freaking diabetes. If she wasn't so aware of the disease, who knows how far it would have progressed before her idiot doctor finally tested her. An ambulance took me to the ER of the local hospital after I was snuck up on and beaten about 30 to 40 times by my now ex-wife with a steel rod. The back end of a Colt gun, to be specific. The doctor who examined me in the ER was a very small, older Filipino woman who barely looked at my injuries and was more interested in telling me that I had no reason to be there. "You're a big, strong man. Why you not stop her? Why you not run away? You're fine, lady no hurt man." When the forensic nurse came in to take the photos for the police report, the doctor shooed her away. "He doesn't need you. He's fine. He's fine." She refused to take x-rays or do a CT scan. I was hit in the head a few times and sent me home with no medication or follow-up instructions. I found out later when I got myself to a real doctor that she broke the law by not allowing the forensic nurse to do her job, and that I should have had x-rays and a CT scan because I had 3 broken ribs, a separated shoulder, and a skull fracture that caused some brain injuries. As far as I know, she got no reprimand or punishment for it, and the judge allowed my ex-wife to plea bargain down to offensive touching because of the lack of forensic evidence. Just the other day, I was getting my 20-week scan and the doctor said, "Looks like baby has a cute dinky little nose, unlike his mom's schnoz." It's not so bad, but I'm a little conscious about my big nose, so I thought that was rude. But I'm glad the baby doesn't have my nose. Another time I was in hospital for a miscarriage, and a nurse had to clean up the blood and she loudly said she'd rather be in the nursery than doing this. That was heartbreaking because me too, B-word. My GP had a weekly checkup with my father for years due to him having heart issues. Simple assessment to see if everything was stable. He saw him every single week. He saw him losing about 10 kilos, 24 pounds, as well. Never advised a single extra thing and said he was fine. That was until we forced my father to go to the hospital for a detailed checkup. "But the GP says I'm fine," where he passed away a week later. He was in the terminal phase of lung cancer. A fricking lung cancer that had been eating away at him for months, yet the GP didn't even bother noticing anything. I still can't believe this. I went to get checked for transmissibles after I was a victim of the unspeakable act. She was asking me about the experience, if I knew the person, and if anyone else was home. Yes, it was a family member, and one person was asleep upstairs. She asked me why I didn't scream to wake up the person, with a matter-of-fact look on her face. Yeah, you're right, I should have done that. Stupid me for letting it happen. B-word. I never went back there. I was refused birth control once because apparently it's a decision my husband needed to be present for because we could want kids. Nothing permanent, just birth control. Jesus. 2 occasions, same moron doctor. I was like 12 and I got a skin infection in my back, and he just blatantly told me that it was that disease where fish have to eat the dead skin and that it had no cure and it was going to get a lot worse. Being a kid, I was heartbroken by that, especially when told in such a blunt way. Anyways, my mum took me to another hospital and they were shocked at how dumb the other guy was. Obviously wrong diagnosis, it was something really easy to treat, and how he could just blurt that out to a kid. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.